This is the fastest fish in the entire world. And I know what you're thinking. Dude, Beyond the Blue, you've lost your mind this time. This thing looks like a moldy potato that somehow grew a moldy potato face on it. But trust me on this one, this thing is fast. Yeah, told you. This is the frogfish.
And if you're looking at this and wondering what exactly is wrong with it, the answer is basically everything.
It doesn't have scales, it doesn't have a hydrodynamic body, and most importantly, it doesn't even swim. Besides what I just showed you, these fish actually appear to be incredibly slow and incredibly awkward, and realistically, they violate every single rule of what makes a fish actually good at being a fish, or really good at being anything. So how does a fish that can't swim ever survive? If you look at the basic rules of the ocean, survival usually comes down to one very simple concept.
You need to be able to move.
Fish have spent hundreds of millions of years perfectly optimizing their bodies for the water, because if a predator is chasing you, your only real option is to just swim away faster than them. And so, evolution created the perfect swimming machines. And then there's this guy. Yes, they are classified as real fish. And yes, they are essentially potatoes with legs too. And while that sounds really funny, this doesn't really explain how this fish would ever survive a day in the ocean without actually being able to swim. But to understand how this walking potato stays alive, we first have to look at what family of fish it actually belongs to. When you hear the word anglerfish, you probably picture the exact same thing everyone else does. You picture the midnight zone. You picture a terrifying monster with needle teeth dangling a glowing light bulb in front of its face to lure in prey. And that makes sense. In the deep ocean, where there's absolutely zero sunlight, a glowing lure is an incredible hunting strategy. Everything is starving and any source of light looks like a potential meal. But the frogfish is actually a type of anglerfish too. They have a fishing rod attached to their head and they use a lure to catch prey. There's just one major problem. Frogfish don't live in the pitch black abyss. They live in the shallow, sunlit coral reefs. And in a bright coral reef, dangling a piece of bait in front of your face is an absolutely terrible idea. You're actively waving a giant flag that tells every single shark, eel, and barracuda in the area exactly where you are. For a deep sea anglerfish, the darkness protects them. But for a frogfish, there's no darkness. Everything can see them, and since we've already established that they're too slow to swim away, if a predator spots them, they're just dead. So how do you dangle a piece of bait in broad daylight without a predator just eating you instead? The answer is that frogfish survive by completely abandoning the idea of looking like an animal. Yes, that moldy potato look actually does something. If you want to hide in a coral reef, you can't just sit behind a rock. Predators in reefs are actively hunting in every single crevice, so the frogfish has to take it a step further. It literally becomes the reef. Their lumpy, potato-like bodies are actually perfectly designed to mimic sea sponges, pieces of coral, or clumps of algae. They replicate the exact physical texture of their environment. Their skin is covered in fake warts, bumps, and weird skin flaps that look exactly like, well, this. Some species even have dark spots painted onto their bodies to mimic the hollow holes of a sea sponge. When a predator swims by, it doesn't see a slow fish hiding on the reef. It just sees a sponge. And nobody wants to eat a sponge. You don't exactly look at a lumpy piece of foam and think, ah, yes, delicious. This is why they walk instead of swim. If you're trying to convince the world that you're a stationary piece of coral, you can't suddenly dart across the water. You have to move at the exact same pace as the ocean currents, slowly creeping along the bottom so that you never break the illusion. But coral reefs are incredibly diverse. There are yellow sponges, red corals, and brown rocks. So what happens if a bright yellow frogfish accidentally gets knocked into a patch of dark red coral? If a frogfish is sitting on the wrong colour background, its entire survival strategy is basically ruined. A yellow fish on a red rock is basically just a neon sign for predators. Now, if you're an octopus, this isn't a problem. Octopuses can change their skin colour in a fraction of a second to match whatever they're touching. But frogfish don't have that ability. They can change colour to match their environment, but they do it in the most inconvenient way possible. Instead of instantly shifting their skin cells, a frogfish has to physically produce new pigments and slowly alter its entire body. This process takes weeks. If a yellow frogfish moves to a red sponge, it will literally just sit there, completely exposed, slowly turning orange, and then eventually red over the course of an entire month. Frogfish basically have to commit to a spot. Once they find a good sponge that matches their colour, they'll just stop moving. They sit in the exact same position for weeks or even months at a time. But if you're literally stuck in one spot for months and you can't chase after food, how do you actually get anything to eat? This is where the anglerfish part of their anatomy finally comes into play. Since they can't use a glowing light bulb in a sunlit reef, their lure has to be much more convincing. The fishing rod on a frogfish's head is actually just a modified fin, and at the end of that rod is a little fleshy lump called the esker. The frogfish's lure physically mimics the exact shape and appearance of a small worm, or a tiny shrimp. Some of them even have fake little eyes and legs. When the frogfish gets hungry, it just sits perfectly still, blending into the sponge, and starts casting its line. It twitches the rod, making the fake worm wiggle and dart through the water exactly like a real, panicking animal. It's literally puppeteering a fake creature to trick other fish into coming closer. And this lure is incredibly valuable. If a bigger fish swims by and actually manages to bite the fake worm off, the frogfish is completely fine. Over the next few weeks, its body will fully regenerate a brand new, perfectly shaped worm to replace the old one. But this still leaves a pretty obvious physical problem. Okay, a small fish sees the worm. It swims up to investigate, but the frogfish is still a slow, lumpy rock. If the smaller fish gets spooked and tries to dart away, the frogfish physically cannot chase it. So how does a fish that can barely walk actually catch prey that's specifically designed to swim away fast? If you're physically incapable of chasing your food, you really only have one option left. You have to make sure the food never gets the chance to run in the first place. Despite being the slowest fish in the entire ocean, the frogfish actually possesses the fastest strike in the vertebrate kingdom. When a prey fish gets close enough to the lure, the frogfish attacks, and this attack takes exactly 6 milliseconds. To put that into perspective, it takes a human about 300 milliseconds to blink. The frogfish's strike is 50 times faster than you can blink your eyes. It's so fast that the prey fish literally doesn't even have time to realize it's in danger. The fish doesn't see the attack coming. It doesn't feel the water shift. 1 millisecond, the fish is looking at the worm. 6 milliseconds later, the fish is inside a stomach. The movement is so violent that scientists literally had to use high-speed cameras running at thousands of frames per second just to figure out what was actually happening. But wait. How does a fat, slow rock physically move its body that fast? If a normal animal tried to accelerate its muscles in 6 milliseconds, the sheer physical force would just tear its own tissue apart, which is genuinely frowned upon in biology. So what is the frogfish actually doing? The secret to this impossible speed is that the frogfish isn't actually lunging forward to bite the fish. If you try to punch something underwater, your fish slows down because water is incredibly dense. It pushes back against you. If a frogfish tried to throw its head forward to bite a fish, the water pressure would push the prey away before the teeth even reached it. So the frogfish just deletes the water. When the frogfish strikes, its entire jaw unhinges. The bones in its skull instantly expand outward, making its mouth up to 12 times bigger. By suddenly creating a massive cavern inside its head, it creates an instant vacuum. The frogfish is literally just sucking in the actual water that the fish is currently swimming in. Imagine you're swimming in a swimming pool and suddenly the entire bottom of the pool drops out. It doesn't matter how fast you can swim, you're going down with the water. That's exactly what happens to the prey. The water they're resting in is violently sucked into the frogfish's mouth, and the prey is just dragged along with it. There's no escaping it, because escaping would require swimming faster than the water itself. But if you're sucking in that much water, and whatever happens to be floating in front of you, what happens when the thing in front of you is bigger than you are? Because the frogfish's mouth expands to 12 times its original size, they catch things that shouldn't even be possible for them to eat. Frogfish routinely swallow prey that's completely larger than they are. They'll even eat lionfish, completely ignoring the poisonous spikes on their back. Why let a little deadly venom ruin a perfectly good meal? If it fits inside the vacuum radius, it goes inside the stomach. Now, if you look at the deep sea fish that eat huge meals, like the black swallower, they usually just handle this by letting their stomach stretch out like a giant balloon. They become incredibly bloated, and they basically just float around completely disabled while they digest. When a frogfish swallows a crab that's larger than its own body, its stomach just forcefully compresses the meal down. The frogfish's body barely even looks different. It just packs the giant meal into its digestive tract, folds its jaw back into place, and immediately goes back to looking like a normal sponge. They can eat a meal twice their size, and 10 seconds later, you wouldn't even know they had eaten at all. So, if this vacuum strike is this overpowered, and they can eat things larger than themselves, why don't we see giant frogfish sucking up whole schools of tuna? What if the frogfish was the size of a great white shark? Let's just imagine for a second a frogfish that's 20 feet long and weighs 5,000 pounds. If a creature that massive had the exact same 6 millisecond vacuum strike, it would be a total disaster. A shark-sized frogfish opening its mouth 12 times its normal value in a fraction of a second would suck in small boats. It would pull scuba divers from dozens of feet away straight into its stomach. The force of all that water moving would create a massive whirlpool on the ocean floor every single time it got hungry. It would basically be completely unstoppable. But physics actually completely ruins this. The reason the tiny vacuum strike works is specifically because the frogfish is small. Water is heavy. Expanding a tiny mouth in 6 milliseconds requires a lot of energy, but it's actually possible. If you scaled that mouth up to the size of a garage door, the amount of water you'd have to displace is enormous. The energy required to pull thousands of gallons of water into a vacuum in 6 milliseconds would literally shatter the bones in the giant frogfish's skull. The water pressure would crush its own jaw before the mouth even fully opened. Physics strictly limits how large a vacuum-feeding animal can get while maintaining that kind of speed. This is exactly why the largest frogfish in the world max out at a little over a foot long. They physically just can't get any bigger. So they're stuck being small, and they're stuck walking on the bottom of the ocean. But what happens if they actually have to swim? Like if a strong current knocks them off the reef and into the open water. We already know that frogfish use their fins to walk. Their fins have joints and elbows, and they're built to grip rocks, not to push water. So if a frogfish is suddenly suspended in the open ocean, it can't just start flapping its arms to swim. It would just sink like a stone. If they want to move through the water, they have to use jet propulsion. Unlike a normal fish, their gill openings are actually tiny, tube-like holes located all the way back behind their legs. When they need to swim, they gulp massive amounts of water into their mouth and then forcefully shoot the water out through the tiny tubes behind their legs. They literally propel themselves forward by blasting water out of their exhaust pipes. And as you can see, it's not graceful. It's incredibly inefficient. It uses a massive amount of energy, and they can only do it for very short bursts before they get completely exhausted and just drift back down to the seafloor. Even when forced to do the most basic fish activity in the world, the frogfish does it in a completely backwards way. Okay, so they have camouflage, they have the fastest strike on Earth, and they have built-in jetpacks. Well, the jetpacks are pretty terrible, but these guys do sound really strong. But realistically, they aren't. The entire survival strategy of the frogfish is based on one single concept: don't be seen. And that strategy works perfectly, right up until it doesn't. If a predator actually manages to see through the disguise, the frogfish is completely doomed. Let's say a moray eel is hunting on the reef. Eels have terrible eyesight, but they have an incredible sense of smell. If the eel smells the frogfish and realizes that the weird looking sponge is actually made of meat, the frogfish has absolutely zero defense mechanisms. They don't have hard scales, they don't have venomous spikes, they don't have a warning display. And as we just established, their jet propulsion swimming is just way too slow and exhausting to actually outrun an eel. If their camouflage fails, they just die. That's it. Game over. It's an all or nothing gamble. They put all their energy into stealth and left absolutely nothing for defense. But predators are the least of their worries. Actually, for a frogfish, the absolute most dangerous thing in the ocean is another frogfish. When you're a fish that literally never moves, finding a mate is a massive problem. You can't exactly go swimming around looking for a partner when your top speed is a slow crawl and you're trying your hardest to look like a rock. But eventually, a male frogfish will catch the scent of a female and slowly trudge his way across the reef to find her. And when he does, things usually go terribly wrong. In the frogfish world, the females are a lot bigger than the males. And as we already know, a frogfish is hardwired to instantly vacuum up anything that moves in front of its face. They don't think about it. It's just a 6-millisecond reflex. So when a tiny male frogfish approaches a giant female frogfish to mate, the female brain often just registers him as food. Before the male can even attempt to reproduce, the female jaw unhinges, the vacuum activates, and the male is instantly swallowed whole.
Which really ruins the mood.
Their own hunting reflexes are so strong that they regularly just cannibalize their own species by accident. Mating is literally a life or death mission. So mating is a disaster, and the adults are basically just cannibalistic rocks. But surely, this bizarre mutation takes generations to develop, right? What do the babies even look like? You'd expect a baby frogfish to just look like a pebble-sized version of the adult, a little walking rock. But they don't. When the frogfish hatch from their eggs, they look and act completely like a normal fish. They have normal fins, they have a normal body, and most importantly, they actually swim. For the first few weeks or months of their lives, baby frogfish live near the surface of the ocean, swimming around eating microscopic plankton just like any other normal fish. And there's a very specific reason they do this. If baby frogfish hatched on the reef and immediately started walking, they'd never be able to leave that specific reef. The entire species would be trapped in one tiny location, and if that reef died, the frogfish would go extinct. So, evolution forces the babies to be normal. They use their normal fins to swim into the ocean currents, allowing them to drift for hundreds of miles across the open sea. This is how frogfish spread across the entire world. But once they find a new, suitable reef, they stop swimming. They sink to the bottom. Their fins thicken into legs, their skin gets lumpy. They intentionally mutilate themselves from a highly capable fish into a walking potato. They basically reach peak physical performance and just go, nah, I'm good. I think I'll be a rock now. But wait. If their whole strategy relies on sinking to the seafloor and mimicking coral, what happens if one of these babies ends up somewhere that doesn't have a seafloor? The ocean is massive, and not every baby frogfish is lucky enough to land on a nice, shallow coral reef. Sometimes, the ocean currents drag them out into the middle of the deep, open sea, where the bottom is thousands of feet down. If they sank there, they'd be instantly crushed by the pressure. So one specific type of frogfish found a completely different solution. This is a sargassum frogfish, and instead of living on the bottom of the ocean, it lives at the very top. In the open ocean, there are massive floating islands of seaweed called sargassum. When the baby frogfish finds one of these floating forests, it just moves in. The sargassum frogfish has evolved to perfectly mimic the floating seaweed. Its skin is coloured in leafy appendages that look exactly like plant vines. It's perfectly coloured to match the yellow and brown algae, and it still doesn't swim. Instead of walking on rocks, the sargassum frogfish uses its weird, jointed hands to physically grab the vines of seaweed, climbing through the floating forest like a bizarre underwater monkey. Which is a sentence I never thought I'd have to say. It still has the fishing lure. It still has the 6-millisecond vacuum strike. It just took the exact same body plan and applied it to a completely different ecosystem. This proves that the frogfish isn't just some weird mistake. This body plan actually works. And I know, a lot of times when we think about evolution, we're usually just thinking about how can we get the most progress possible. We think that animals are always trying to become faster. We think they're trying to become stronger, smarter, and more athletic. We look at a great white shark or a tuna and we assume that this is what success looks like. But evolution doesn't actually care if you're super fast or if you look super cool. And it definitely doesn't care if you actually use your fins for swimming. Evolution only cares about one thing. Does it keep you alive long enough to reproduce? Assuming your mate doesn't accidentally eat you first, of course. Being a walking potato is just as successful as being an apex predator. At least, up until now it has been. And honestly, in an ocean full of things constantly fighting for their lives, looking like a potato but getting to chill all day seems pretty nice too. But anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed. And thank you to those in the comments who have been supporting these videos. You guys really help me keep going. And if you want some suggestions, just leave them in the comments. And hey, there's a decent chance I could make a video on it. And make sure to check out this video about another fish that at least swam, but was basically a rock itself.